I'm up working at our larger site for the weekend, and we just had a pretty wild amount of rain. It was almost over an inch, which is ridiculous for mid-late January. It's been thawed out, so the ground is extremely saturated, and now it finally dipped down a little below freezing and snowed a bit. It's a unique moment to see how a real influx of water into a winter landscape is moving where it's being stored. And so I thought I would share some updates and some observations in this video about how water is working through this landscape in the middle of winter after a wild, silly rain. I'd love to start with an update on our pond system here. I'll link here to the initial video showing when Juan and I worked on this last winter. I'll take our little steps up the pond berm to get on top of the low end of this pond where the berm is. A lot of neat things happening with where things are freezing, where they're not. I'd like to explore that a little. I'd love to get input from folks. But right now I'm just appreciating how much water has come into this. It's probably gone up another foot since that last rain. It has the rest of this to go. And I'll take a look a little bit. We eyeballed where the overflow locations would be for this pond. So what we don't want to have happen is have the water fill, and then rush over this berm, because that would cut it out and make all the water run away in one fell swoop. So I think we've got a really nicely eyeballed overflow sill on that side, and also one that would be going out into the walkway in this area. That remains to be determined. We'll know that exactly once the water actually overflows. We're another couple good rains away from that, but it's just amazing how much water this is taking on. I think the frozen and thawed parts of this are telling an interesting story. Well, certainly right by the edges, since it's been above freezing and we had a little bit of sun the other day, the soil itself is above freezing and warm, and that's probably what's melting the ice that wants to form near the edges. These cool designs, I can't really quite get my head around why that's happening, but I wonder if there's water leaking out of the soil into this that's thawing that out. If you've got any ideas, please share them in the description or share them in the comments. I certainly didn't go in and mark that, do like an Andy Goldsworthy thing, but it's pretty compelling how the freezing and the thawing parts of this are showing up. And I really like that right now there's a nice complexity to the edge of the water line of this. There's a little island that slowly is getting underwater. That was by design. There's an old ash, there's a box elder, an ash, and then some shrub layer that my intention was when the pond is completely full, this would be underwater and it would create its own interesting complex habitat in the early spring. And then as it's settled down, there could be wet-loving edge plants for the shade there. And so that's just on its way towards getting overflowed right now. And we got a ways to go on filling. But boy, that's just so much water that came in. Many tens of thousands of gallons of water since that rain came in. That's the high end of the pond, and there's the middle. And then the low end is down here. This is what I redid over the summer with a small excavator and made the berm much thicker and way more packed. Tried to really smear clay on this end. The goal being that this would be able to hold water without having it leak from underneath. That's what happened on the first pass when we simply cut and dumped with a skid steer. And one way I can test, I can ask the question, hey, is the pond leaking actively right now? Is what's happening downslope of this berm? This was where the water leaked out in the past, and right now there's no water at all going through there. So I feel like the pond is only filling and not actually leaking. It's a cool moment to be able to test and see that, because if the ground is thawed, if there's moisture coming up from the ground, it's going to be bare and melt the snow. And so if there's snow that's holding in what would be a flowing water trench, if there was leaking from that pond, every fleck of snow I see here in the lull is telling me, nope, there's no water at all that's moving through here. So that's a relief. It feels like it's really starting to hold. I'm a bit further down watershed here. That's the berm again. And so this is something we'll have to observe and interact with in the spring, is once the pond is full to overflowing, where is it overflowing? Do we want to adjust that with shovel work? Hopefully we got it close enough that we won't need a machine. I'm pretty sure we won't. And then as it overflows, ultimately, which it will do inevitably, how is it flowing through here? Do we want to get this deeper? Do we want to have silt catches? How fast does it flow? Is there erosion? All of that is future questions to be answered, but need to be able to observe in the meantime and get some information. That larger pond system is in the center of the landscape, more or less, and you can kind of feel a very, very gentle rise into a minor lull, which is the northern end of the landscape, which is its own minor watershed. And that's the watershed that these structures are in. So it's a good moment to ask, after a really intense rain with ground that's already wet, did either of these structures flood? How did the snow interact with it? Did the overflow channels work as we wanted? So let's look through each of those questions. So the overflow channel is this little ditch here, which absolutely flowed. In fact, I still see water in there. So all the snow is completely melted in there and there's standing water. I bet if I were to scuff it up, it's moving eastward at a very gentle pace. In fact, I can see a little further up where it is moving. So this is a drainage ditch that's allowing the landscape to release excess water. And we're not trying to make it this extremely aggressive channel that just rips through the landscape. But when we're at the wet time of year, this area gets extremely wet. So we do need the soil to be able to dump its excess water into this channel and release. But we've got little silt traps all throughout, little areas where it gets a tiny bit wider that we can dig that out and put it next to hazelnuts and elderberries and currants and sea berries and willows that are all to the north of this. So erosion that's happening in this channel can be the silt that's deposited through erosion and settling can be harvested and put next to plants. And so this whole channel allows for water to leave during this time of year or peak rain events, but it asks the nutrients to hang out periodically so we can put them back next to the plants we care about, and that feels really functional. This is that barn structure we've been working on. We got another section done that's an eastern wall, which we can look at in a moment. And so all the snow on the roof has melted off and dripped down. We still need to get a gutter on there and have thoughtful overflows for that. But it's good to see that water that's coming off the roof is settling. It's not rushing through here and it has somewhere to go. The question would be, did snow or water come into this barn during that craziness? And on this side, a tiny bit of snow entered in, but it looks like once we're inside the space, that this windbreak that we established in the hopes of not having wind-driven snow come into the space, that worked well enough. And so the ground in here, it's frozen, it's moist. I mean, it's going to be that way, but it's not saturated from incoming rain or snow, and it's certainly not allowing, there's water not coming under and saturating into here. And those are some of the things we were hoping for, and they're working. We'll still have to get the gutter and more details around water holding on the outside of this and overflow. But seeing this being relatively well drained, relatively level, is encouraging that we can now think about laying out some locust boards and a layer of pallets in that area, and we can start actually storing doors and windows and other resources for what will eventually be a cabin, probably built in that glade. But we needed to have that question answered first. Tons of rain or wind-driven snow in the landscape. Will this area get saturated? It is a nice, solid, relieving no. So now it becomes a storing space for the barn. So there's so much more that could be looked at, but maybe I'll keep the scope of this wander and observation session to that large pond, to the waterways that are right around some of the infrastructure that we're building, and what's happening down watershed of the pond. Please let me know what sort of questions you have. Are you seeing things that are of concern or adjustments that you would suggest we think about making? What sort of things would you like to see planted out around this pond? We've got some ideas of what we're excited to add, but we're open to other ideas from folks. Any neat suggestions as to what the heck that's all about, those specific rays? I'm definitely not complaining. I really like the look quite a bit. But yeah, that's our winter landscape, one little section observed. and maybe if there's interest, I can do some more wanders in other areas.